if you talk to a kid today about marriage, boys will usually say, "Boy, why should I ever get married? It's just putting the state in bed with you." And when you get a divorce, as happens 4 out of 5 times in the USA, out of every 5 marriages, 4 break up in divorce sooner or later. Well, if that happens, the wife gets the kids, she gets the house, she gets the car, and she gets maybe half of your money before taxes, which is 3/4 of all the money you earn, and you live in poverty for the rest of your life. Well, that's from the boy's point of view. Now, from the girl's point of view, with feminism having taken over, is, hey, why do I have to get married? I can take care of myself. I don't need a guy. Now, these obviously, different people have different ideas, but the growth of feminism and the fact that men get treated horribly in a divorce case have led to people not getting married as much. Now, why? Give me a good reason why people should get married. Well, the gays who fought long and hard to gain the right to marry each other. For instance, if one gets sick and you go to the hospital to visit, well then they say, "Are you next of kin?" And if you're just the boyfriend or the girlfriend in a lesbian relationship, they say, "Sorry, you can't come in." Well, there should be other solutions than marriage to that problem, but in my opinion, which is just one guy, the fact that these gay marriages are being promoted now is going to open a can of worms. What do I mean by that? Well, nobody has even thought about the let's go this way. There's a lot of noise here. Nobody has even thought about the problems that are going to come up with gay divorces. My guess is that 4 out of 5 gay marriages will end in divorce. And in Europe, anyway, they have this thing called PAC. So apparently that's much easier to get out of. But in a divorce, it's usually a legal dispute, a lot of big lawyers' fees, and maybe years in court going back and forth and fighting over property. It's a terrible thing. Marriage causes maybe a lot more problems than it solves. The old days, I'm talking about the Middle Ages. Here, this is the church that we're right in front of right now. In the Middle Ages, the upper class, the rich people, had to get married because they needed legitimacy for their kids. Now, if a couple got married in the Middle Ages, if they were wealthy, they were what's called nobility. And the nobility wanted very much to have alliances. That is, if somebody owned a big castle on Mountain A, they married the daughter of the owner of Castle B, a couple miles away, and they combined their estates. And of course, if children were born to someone who was not married, they were called in law res nullius, nobody's property, nobody's child, or in other words, bastards. And that was just a horrible thing to be in the Middle Ages. Now, why did poorer people get married? I think to imitate the richer people. But obviously, if we zip ahead to the 20th century, when I had most of my life, that's in the 1950s to 1970s, well, in that period, the laws were encouraging marriage, because here's how it worked. First of all, a lot of women got pregnant, maybe intentionally, and that led to what they used to call a shotgun wedding. the relatives wanted the man responsible to take responsibility for the support of the woman and the kid, and they arranged they applied social and maybe even physical pressure to get the couple married. Those shotgun marriages lasted a long time in the old days. You know the reason why? Because it was very, very hard to get a divorce. In fact, divorces is almost a modern thing. In the old days, you had to get the permission of the Pope to get an annulment. There was no such thing as a divorce. Now, let's go back in history just a little bit, because I'm going to tell you what happened to marriages and divorces historically a few hundred years ago. Well, there was a very popular case in London, I should say a very popular legal action, and here's how it worked. If a man slept with a woman, which has been going on for a couple 100,000 years, I guess, but in the old days in England, if the man did not marry the lady, kids or not, forget kids, if the man did not marry the lady, you know what happened? She would sue for breach of promise. That means she'll say, oh, in order to get in my pants, this man had to promise me that he would marry me, and he didn't marry me, and therefore I should get the same financial compensation as if we were married. Well, as you might guess, this kind of lawsuit led to many frauds, and eventually in England they said no more breach of promise, and that was a big change. Now, there was something like that with regard to divorce. When I was a kid, there was no such thing as a agreed divorce between two people. What happened was, if a man wanted a divorce or a woman wanted a divorce, they had to do, well, I guess you'd call it a fraud. Now, what was this fraud? Well, one person had to be guilty and the other person had to be innocent. So they would arrange for one of the partners to be photographed in bed, usually by a private detective, who would say, oh, we caught this guy in flagrante delicato, which meant he was making love to somebody he wasn't married to while being married to the plaintiff. So that obviously led to the same kind of fraud that happened in this breach of promise. And while I was a teenager, they changed the law to no-fault divorce. Well, the idea was if two people didn't get along together, they would just say, I'm going to get a lawyer, we're going to settle our property differences either friendly or unfriendly, and the next thing that's going to happen is we're both free to marry somebody else. Well, the net result of all that is that there are a lot of legal cases where the husband has to pay the lawyer and the wife sues for lots of money, usually half of what was earned during the course of the marriage. And well, that's why a lot of people don't want to be married, because if it's a guy, he loses his money, and if it's a woman, she, in many cases, if she's a feminist, says, I didn't need this guy anyway. In the Islamic world, marriage is still popular because if the husband doesn't like his wife for any reason at all, all he has to do is say, I divorce thee. And he tells the wife, go back to your parents. She gets nothing, except maybe she's legally entitled to whatever her dowry was. She's entitled to get that back. But in the Islamic world, very seldom does the dowry even exist after the man wants to get rid of the wife and have a new girlfriend or a new wife. But the man gets the kids, the man gets the house, the man gets the car, and the wife, if she's lucky, gets to keep her underpants. So marriage is very popular. And how do people get married? There's actually sort of the girl is told by her father, marry this guy. She's ordered to marry a guy. It's kind of like slavery. So we have in half the world, the Islamic world, it's a totally different situation. And so I'm going to concentrate more on the Western world. Now, we said that the wife gets everything and the husband gets nothing except the obligation to pay support. But another thing that has led to this situation, which makes marriage quite unpopular with guys, is that kids are no longer bastards if the parents are not married. That status has been completely changed, and kids inherit from their biological father. That happened with a very famous recent case where the head of a parcel delivery service, what was the name of that? Well, anyway, it wasn't UPS, it was their biggest competitor. In any event, this chap who owned the delivery service and was a billionaire had a private island where he kept, maybe maybe a dozen Filipino love slaves. And one of these love slaves had a kid who was about 10 years old when the owner crashed his airplane in the sea and was never found again. Neither he nor the wreckage was ever found. But the kid was proven to be his biological kid, because when the deceased had a wart removed, they took the DNA from that and matched it up with the kid, and the kid inherited something like $1 billion. I was very curious what happened to that kid, and so I looked him up yesterday on YouTube, and it turns out that he became a drug addict, a drug dealer, spent time in and out of jail, and of course blew his entire $1 billion fortune by the time he was 25. So in 10 years he blew $1 billion. Imagine that. How much is that per? Is that 10 million a year? That's $1 million a month. I can't spend $1 million in 10 years. But in any event, I suppose the moral of that little side story is that leaving your kid all that kind of money, even if it's unintentional, I'm sure it was unintentional, isn't such a great idea. Religion played a big part in marriage because everybody respected the local priest, or in a Protestant religion, the father, the preacher, who would definitely encourage marriage, and went so far as if any of his parishioners, any of his flock, were just making love with each other and not being married, guess what? They were living in sin. Oh, terrible. Now, so as a result, if people wanted to go to heaven in the old days, they couldn't live in sin. They had to be married. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story, a real true story from my own life, and I can mention real names because I'm sure they're all dead for at least 50 years. When I was a little kid, maybe 10 or 12 years old, my dad takes me to visit, I think he might have been a cousin. His name was Dudi Campbell, D-U-D-I, Campbell, all right. And this Dudi Campbell lived with a very pretty girl in a house that had some vines, and he was a poet. and an artist and a songwriter and a piano player. And she, the girl, was also an artist. And my dad says, oh, you don't want to be like Duty Campbell. He's living in sin. Oh, terrible, living in sin. Oh, my dad was so vehement. Oh, you don't want to live in sin. And he says, you want to be like, oh, by the way, I like Duty Campbell. I liked his quaint little house. His girlfriend was really nice. I had my first beer with her. Wow, terrific. I want to live in sin. Oh, but my father said, no, 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 you don't want to live in sin. Okay, so anyway, my dad then says, what you want to be is like Duty Campbell's brother, George. And George was a big-time executive in Hollywood. Woo! And we actually went out to see George, who had a big, beautiful house, nice wife, at least 2 kids. And as I said, I think they were my third cousins or something. But in any way, George, turns out, was the manager of a traveling show. I don't know if it's still around, but it was called the Ice-Capades. And that was a show where they did Walt Disney characters. It was Holiday on Ice. And this George was the manager, very well paid. And he was my dad. I don't know if he was a little bit jealous. It occurred to me he might have been, that because this George was very successful, very rich, and and now we come to the end of the story. 10 years later, George, the rich Hollywood guy, has had a divorce and committed suicide. Wow. End of George. Duty Campbell, I'm not really sure 100% what happened to him, but I was doing some research, academic research, and I went to the rare book room of the New York Public Library. And I vaguely remembered that good old Duty Campbell, being a poet, decided he was going to make some money by being the guy who immortalized, like doctors, dentists, postmen, librarians, and so forth. He immortalized these people in poems, telling about how wonderful they were. There was an artist who did the same thing. He would have pictures of, he would call them American heroes, but anyway, people who performed valuable services. And so here I am in the rare book room of the New York Public Library, and there's a huge poem on the wall. And I looked at the poem, and that's kind of strange to have it was written in that, not hieroglyphics, but whatever they call that. It's kind of a script. It must have been parchment, and it was really big. It was bigger than me, the picture. Okay, so the title of it was called The Librarian. Now, I don't remember the poem, but it was very much glorifying the job of the librarian. And I guess that's why it was hanging in the New York Public Library. So I read the poem. Well, it was kind of interesting and nice. It rhymed. And at the bottom was a signature. Well, do I have to make you guess? By Duty Campbell, the same guy who was living in sin. Now, I bet he didn't commit suicide, but I really don't know whatever happened to Duty. Maybe I'll look him up on Google. Maybe he's there. In any event, to wind up our story, the marriage as an institution is pretty dead because of the court awards very much in favor of the woman. 2, from the female side, feminism makes the woman much less interested in being married and having lifetime support from a guy. She feels, hey, I don't need guys, I can do it on my own. and the fact that divorce is no longer something really hard to get. Marriage and divorce is like, going out and buying a loaf of bread. No big deal anymore. And wow, another little sidelight. In the Jewish faith, which I was just seeing a movie about, divorce is still really hard to get. And if the man doesn't want to give a divorce, the woman never gets it. Crazy, huh? But that was just something I just remembered because I saw the movie last night. The divorce was called a get, and the woman was very desperate to get a get, and so her relatives hired a hitman to threaten the husband that he would either give a get or he would get got. And so what happened was, in this movie, the people who got the get, their motel and their business was taken over by the mafia. Okay, well, that was just I think we're going to cut that. Well, in any event, getting back to our tale, so marriage and divorce has become, you might say, too easy and too expensive, and it basically is, you get the state in bed with you. Why do you need the state in bed with you when you can have a nice relationship, and when it comes time to end it, you say, hey, bye, and you each go your own way. So I hope this has been a little bit informative for you, and obviously there are a few people in the world who want to get married. They think that piece of paper is going to make a big difference in their relationship. It really doesn't. I don't think. I've been married and happy, and unmarried and happy. And I don't think the piece of paper makes any difference at all, except it's expensive to end it. Oh, I hear that bell. Look at that. Somebody's getting married. My God. After all my advice. Huh.